Good morning guys. We're back at it again. Exciting time. We're gonna be working on polishing the concrete floors and finishing them up real nice before we get our doors and windows in. And we've got Carlos, all the way from San Diego.
That's right.
New Grind is actually a Canadian company.
Canadian company out of Vancouver, British Columbia.
So they're gonna be working with us on basically getting this floor polished up real nice, and we even got high carb Hanna. They have some pros and some real nice benefits as opposed to a standard concrete polisher.
Traditional grinder. Yeah, so it's a 6-disc system where 3 discs are going in one direction and the other 3 are going in the opposite direction, which makes it have that cross-functioning situation on the floor.
And what's also really cool about this unit compared to a standard planetary grinder is that you can get right up to the wall, and especially into corners and stuff, because you don't have a big circle that you have to try to fit into a
1/8 inch from the wall is what you can
1/8.
1/8 of an inch from the wall.
And especially if you're doing drywall, that will obviously more than get you close enough, because drywall is typically 1/2 inch. So you're going to be able to get your polish right next to the studs.
Our primary focus is on, equipping contractors to kind of do it yourself, especially on a unit like the RS150, which is one of our smaller units, which has a 14-inch footprint. We have distribution throughout the country in the US and in Canada. Specifically here in Arizona, we have Prestige Protective Coatings that have a location in Tucson and in Phoenix that provide all the support for these types of machines.
All right guys, so here is a before shot of the floor. So you can definitely see the different trowel marks and those shiny bits. That is where I use a 2-part epoxy that is specific for concrete to fill in those cracks. So the reason why the cracks formed is because we chose to not do control cuts going through the house. So we wanted the cracks to form naturally and a little bit more organic, rather than having clean lines going through the house. And that's just kind of more of a design choice than a function choice or anything like that. So the first day that Carlos was here, he showed me how to use the machine and going over the method for grinding and polishing the floor. Now, I know a lot of people are going to be curious about using the helix in the slab and doing a grind and polish. Now, if I were to do this over again, and this is what I would do, because this is where a lot of the difficulty came in with grinding and polishing this floor, is because the recommendations from Helix on how to do it and New Grind, they were the same. They wanted me to start off at a 100 grit resin pad, which would be the equivalent of starting to sand wood, say using a 1600 grit sandpaper. It's not going to really grind down. It's not going to take a lot off the top, which is what they wanted, but it wasn't really going to give us the finished floor that we want. So if I were to do this again, I would not do helix in the slab if I'm doing a grind and polish. So if we were just putting a regular floating floor over top, no problem doing the helix in there. But since we're doing a grind and polish, I wouldn't do it again. And there's a couple of reasons why. Our floor was not, it was manually troweled as opposed to being laser troweled. So that means that there's a lot more kind of undulations and there's a lot more variation in the height of the slab. And so what I noticed with that is that basically the method that I was doing is I was not able to grind down in certain areas enough to really kind of even out the tone of the floor. And even in some of the areas where the epoxy was, it was very difficult to get it ground down using the method that was recommended. So I thought this project was originally going to take me 3 or 4 days. It ended up taking probably closer to 9 or 10 days. And it wasn't any fault of the machine or anything like that. It was purely the method. And the method was kind of mucked up because of the helix. So if we didn't have the helix, we could have just gone through the standard method of using a very coarse bit to begin with and then working our way up through the different grits. So the method of grinding and polishing a floor like this is you start off with a very coarse bit to knock down the high spots, to knock out any trowel marks or anything like that. And then you keep progressing up through the different grits and the different style of grinding pads. So the initial method that was recommended by both Helix and by New Grind was basically just to take a tiny bit off the top, but since our slab was manually screeded, and there's a lot of variations in it and trowel marks and stuff, it just was not going to be aggressive enough to really kind of even out the floor. So we had to go with a much more typical method, but since I had done so much work on the floor initially, I had to go back and redo a lot of it. But hey, you live and you learn. So the machine definitely worked great, and what's really cool about it is that you can see I don't have any weights on it. So if you want to be able to grind a little bit harder, you can just put standard weights on it. I think this one you can put up to about 170 pounds on it. So it's pretty cool. And then in some kind of more harder to reach places, New Grind also has, this is called their RX7. So you can kind of really get in the corners and really get up against the edge of a wall, just to make sure that you're getting a nice grind and polish as close as you can right up there. And that little machine is real nice. And especially on some of the areas where I had troubles grinding with the bigger machine, I was able to kind of grind down in certain spots, just using that little unit there. Now, one thing that I have learned about concrete, especially with grinding and polishing this floor, is how much variation there is with concrete. So much variation from just grinding and polishing the same slab that was poured the same day. There are variations in the density and the hardness of the concrete, which can vary just based on the mixture that you get from the concrete plant. So after Hannah and I got the floor ground down to pretty much where we want it, and we're using the 100 grit resin pad, we want to go around and clean the floor and get as much of the dust and dirt off of it as possible, which is really important for the next step. So I use a pressure washer initially to try to clean it, which did work pretty well. But another method is just to spray it down and then use a large bristle brush like this to kind of loosen up the dirt, and then go around and suck up that the dirty water afterwards. And even after I did this, I went around with kind of like a Swiffer mop and really gave it a good clean, because on the next step, when you densify and harden the concrete, you want to make sure that there's none of that dirt and dust in there, because you will see it on your finished floor. So at this stage, while we're still cleaning, the concrete it's very porous before we put the densifier on. So we've ground down the top, we've exposed some aggregate, but concrete itself is very porous. So that means that, say you were to spill something on it, the concrete would soak it up very quickly. So say a glass of wine or something like that, it would soak it up. So here we are, after we've completely cleaned the floor and we've got it ground to a 100 grit resin pad. We're putting down what is called Densifier. And so that basically closes up the pores and makes it much more resistant for any staining or anything like that. And it really hardens the concrete, which is definitely what we want. So here are some of the bits and pads that I use. This is a 30 grit round, 60 grit round button, going up to a 100 grit button. And this is a transitional button between the button and the resin pads. And this is what the resin pad looks like. That's what they wanted me to do the entire floor with, which wasn't gonna work, and give us the result that we want. So this is another before shot, so you can kind of see how it looks. And then after we've gone through everything, much nicer and much more consistent. Looks way better than what it did before. And there's still some kind of variations in the concrete where some of the trowel marks are, but that's just kind of like the nature of concrete. There's going to be some variations with it. It's not going to be absolutely perfect. I do want to give a shout out to Roger and Dale from Prestige Protective Coatings. They were definitely very helpful in guiding me through the process of getting the floor to this point here. So like I said earlier, if I were to do this again, I would not do the helix and the slab. In hindsight, that was kind of the thing that kind of just mucked up the method. So everyone was scared that the helix was going to get exposed, which it is exposed in a few areas where you can kind of see the steel. But once it gets ground down and the floor is completely smooth, you don't really notice it that much. Visually, you don't notice it that much. And like if you're running your hand across it, it's ground down and polished so that it doesn't really, it's not going to like nick your fingers or anything like that. Now, I did have someone ask me on Instagram if I would recommend this for others to do. And I think if you just start with doing a regular slab, no helix in it, just regular rebar, and then really consulting with someone on the exact process that you want to do to get the best results, that's the method that you want to go with. And just kind of go that direction there, and really kind of lean on people with a lot of experience about grinding and polishing floors, because they'll know the different nuances, and that's what Dale and Roger really helped me out with. They've just got decades of experience, and they're able to help out. Anyways, guys, I hope that helps. We're going to protect the floor just with ram board, so that when other trades and myself is working in there, we're not going to scuff up and damage the floor or anything like that. It's going to stay pretty much where it is right now until we're ready to move in. Awesome, guys. Thanks so much for watching. We'll catch you in the next video. Talk to you soon. Peace.